storms that have hit since the beginning of the year. All of them, by the way, on weekends.
Well, since you're retired, you can make believe Monday through Friday is your weekend.
What's a Monday?
Oh, that's a very, 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 very good point. Anyway, we have a great show today, and I want to introduce the lady who always is here to do our water news, and she is the most wonderful person we know in that business. And again, I don't know how she does it, but she does it. It's Miss Chris Austin, the purveyor of Maven's Notebook. Chris, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing good. I miss Chris being out here so we could do the show together side by side. It's we're all getting still we should be used to doing this remotely, but it's fun to have everybody together, and it's just a little different feeling. But we got a great show today, and so tell us what's happening up in your territory and what's new in water.
Oh gosh, well let's see. What were some of the big stories today? Oh well, the Department of Water Resources says that there was a court ruling regarding the Delta tunnels and financing the Delta tunnels. There's this weird thing that they do, and I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't really understand it. I'm not even sure how many lawyers understand it, but the state essentially sues itself to make sure it has authority to issue these bonds that they need to issue for the Delta Conveyance Project. And it's a very technical process, the state suing itself. And the court goes through these things. So the court made a ruling. They turned it down. But all these things really, I think, are on technicalities. So they're appealing it, and they're going to make some changes, and they don't think there's going to be a problem. And of course, all the folks that are opposed to the tunnel think it's a huge problem. So I guess the proof will be in the pudding, whether it turns out to be an issue or not. But once again, slowly we turn on this controversial Delta Tunnel project. It's going to be interesting to see. They've been trying to do this effort really begun way back in the Governor Schwarzenegger years, if you can remember that. Yeah. Many years ago, like before Jerry Brown and before Gavin Newsom. So it's funny when they refer to it as Newsom's tunnels, because he really had very little to do with it. Yeah. It just happens to be landed here. But I mean, the real question is if they can't build the tunnels, if this project gets stopped either by lawsuit or the water agencies don't want to pay for it, or for whatever reason why, I don't know what Plan B is. I actually don't think there is a Plan B. I think it would be very difficult for Southern California, because the farmers in the valley, they'll always have some water from somewhere, but Southern California needs needs imported water, and they're already going to have to take a big cut on the Colorado River. I think that they can get by if they have to take a cut on the state water project, but I don't think the state water project can be eliminated from Metropolitan's water portfolio completely. It could be reduced probably, but not completely. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. We still got a long ways to go, but and funding is just one of the issues. So we'll just have to see.
It sounds pretty convoluted. So I understand it right, Chris. So you're saying that the state Superior Court told the Department of Water and Resources, the DWR, that they couldn't finance the project through bonds, right? They said no, but there were technicalities and things. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those, big lawyer things, and documents. I mean,
I've never quite understood this, even though, smart lawyers have tried to explain it to me. Some things, some things are just too much for me to comprehend, and the state suing itself is like, very strange. But I guess they're going to be the first ones to sue, so that nobody, so that they won't issue the bonds, and someone will come and sue them, and then they'll have a different determination, right? So I guess they're going to get it out of the way. So
So that's the tax money being spent to sue themselves.
well, yes, but but I don't think it's like, hey, we have some money, let's go sue ourselves. I think it is probably to prepare, because if they don't, someone else will.
Yeah.
And that will come on down further on down the line, when it has the potential to derail everything, at least for a while they hash it out. So I think that's what the intention is. But yes, it's a very strange process.
Wow.
As government processes can be.
Absolutely. So what else is shaking?
Oh gosh, we got this groundwater basin in the San Joaquin Valley. It's the one that's headed towards it has this really fabulous designation of being the first basin that's going to have state water board intervention. 10 years ago we passed that Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, with the state water board as the backstop to go in and intervene in the basin if they're not managing it sustainably. And so here we go. There's a hearing on April 16th. They've known that this is coming for a long time, but this is one of the basins that's severely overdrafted. And it's just going to be very tough. They're going to have to cut back a whole bunch, and they also have to fund this thing. So before they even get to the probationary hearing, the GSA is proposing pumping fees of like over $100 per acre foot, or I think there's like $95 an acre foot plus $25 an acre. So it's $11 million of budget that they're trying to create. This is really tough for farmers that have not had to pay for water at all. And that's what groundwater has always been. It's been the free water. So there's that's very hard for a lot of these farmers to swallow. So, and the pumping allocations that they are suggesting in the basin, this is what the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is proposing in the basin, is also very low. That's to reflect the fact that they don't have a lot of water coming into the basin, and they have to stop pumping so much groundwater. So, it's very difficult for them. I think that they are trying. I know that they set up an accounting system, and they did a bunch of recharge last year when it was so wet, and the farmers are I think that they are trying to comply, but this is where the rubber hits the road, because you have to cut back pumping, and that means farmers can't farm on all their land. Some that don't have much land at all, and then they get a small pumping allocation, can't grow anything at all. Now they can probably sell off that water to somebody else, but that's not going to give you an income.
No, no, and even if they could cut back on that and only do portions of their property, that means the price of those crops are going to go up higher because they're going to need it.
Yeah. I mean, these are really, really tough decisions. And I think, sitting up at the 30,000 foot level, you can look down and say, well, some people are going to have to stop farming. But that's really, it's really hard, but there's really no path to go forward. We have to bring our groundwater basins into balance. And this is not, this is just trying to pump so that the groundwater doesn't get further depleted, right? They're not necessarily trying to build up, save a whole lot of water in the aquifer. They're just trying to stop, it going down every year. So, these are very difficult decisions, and my heart goes out to these folks. It must be very hard if you're a farmer and you have land and you have no water, then you can't farm, and that's your business and that's your job, and that's really tough. So, hopefully the state's going to come in and set up something to help these folks that have to make this very difficult transition.
In your conversations with people from the state, do they know or can they accurately determine how deep that the groundwater is? What's the actual capacity at each location where they do? And I would assume they have to measure in certain, not just one area, because I mean.
Oh yeah. The groundwater sustainability agencies are required to set up a monitoring network throughout their basin. Yeah. So it's not just one area. It's multiple areas, and they have a pretty good idea at this point how much water is in the ground, and it's way, way down there. That's the problem. They're very empty aquifers that we have there, especially in the San Joaquin Valley, in the southern San Joaquin Valley.
Wow. Yeah, because they got to make money, the farmers, and when they raise the crops, they pass it to the stores. The stores got to make profit. They pass it to the consumer. Consumer's paying a whole lot more money for the stuff, and I know it's going to be really tough. Really,
yeah.
Really tough.
I think that we're just kind of headed into this world where a lot of these basic things are going to start costing more because the inputs, water is expensive. And we're not the only area, in the world that's having to deal with this. So, it's a bit concerning that you have to cut back agricultural production in a world where we really need to be able to, if we're going to feed everybody on this planet, we can't afford to pull back farmland. But on the other hand, we also can't afford to drain our aquifers completely dry so that no one can do anything in the San Joaquin Valley anymore, include live there, right?
Yeah. On the flip side of groundwater, though, Chris, on the surface water side, I scanned through the article that said this could be the year for Lake Shasta to get full capacity, right? I mean, I don't know how long it's been, but 4.5 million acre feet, and they're at 4.1 or just a little over 4.1 million acre feet right now.
Yeah, and they will probably, and they'll probably fill up Warrville too. They're very good. This is not their first rodeo. Come when the last little bit of snow comes dripping down, they'll be shutting it off to have completely filled up reservoirs. Of course, then water deliveries start in the summer, and so they will tend to drift down, because that's why we put the water in the reservoir, is so we can use it in the summer and the fall. But yeah, we're certainly going to have. It's been a pretty decent water year. Yay for us!
Yeah, thank goodness for that. Well, we got a really fantastic show today, as I mentioned at the top of the introduction here. And we have some great people coming on the show to compliment you, Ms. Austin, so we appreciate that. I would tell our listeners, please go to mavensnotebook.com, become a subscriber to it, get all the latest in water news every single morning on your device, whether it's a PC, a laptop, or your cell phone. It's the greatest way to get information. You can also become a sponsor of that, and we highly recommend it. We love Miss Austin and everything she contributes to the school, and mostly what she does for the industry. And that's why a while back she was inducted into the Green Industry Hall of Fame for all the work that she does. You're an amazing person, Chris, so I do appreciate it every week that you come on the show. So
Awesome.
anyway, you're welcome. We're gonna take a little break and then come back with our really, really, really special guest. And hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a two-part segment. One's going to start today, and then the other one's going to follow up next week on the second half as well. So, Chris, thank you very much for joining us again. And listeners, please go to Maven's Notebook. I'm telling you, it's the best thing you can read about water and keeps you up to date. So thanks, Chris.
Good evening, everyone.
Have a great week, Chris.
Yeah.
NBC News on KCAA Loma Linda, sponsored by Teamsters Local 1932, protecting the future of working families. Teamsters1932.org.
Research shows you're about 10 times more likely to close a deal with an existing customer than a new one. And with water regulations on the rise, it's never been easier to upsell efficient irrigation systems to your customers. Upselling to your current customer base can provide them with the best products for their lawn while growing your business. This is the best time to seize this opportunity. We'll walk you through 5 ways to help you leverage water regulations to upsell to your customers. First, offer to audit your customers' systems. This can generate additional revenue through maintenance while offering the opportunity to discuss upgrades to their current systems. Additionally, offering audits can help strengthen your customer relationships in the long run. Next, talk to your customers about water regulations in your state. As laws around water regulations continually shift, it's important to keep them informed and their systems up to date. If their current systems don't comply with regulations, you can use the opportunity to sell them on more efficient systems. If your state isn't currently mandating water regulations, it could be in the future. You can set your customers and your business ahead of the curve by promoting efficient irrigation systems now. Next, communicate the benefits of smarter products to your customers. Recommend products that are easy to program and operate, and simple to install. Wi-Fi-based smart controllers, rain sensors, and weather stations can give your customers peace of mind, knowing their systems auto-adjust watering schedules based on weather and soil conditions. Talk to your customers about how they can have a great-looking lawn while saving water. PRS rotors and sprays can manage water pressure fluctuations and provide full coverage. Additionally, high-performance nozzles and drip and micro-irrigation can keep lawns healthy through high winds and drought. Promoting these products to your customers is another way to increase your revenue while keeping your customers' water bills down. Last, find a partner you can rely on. SiteOne is here to help your business thrive with smart, quality products, in-branch experts, and online resources. We're right here with you every step of the way. SiteOne can help you turn these regulations into opportunities to grow your business and boost your bottom line. Learn how you can take your business to the next level. Stop by SiteOne to talk with an in-branch expert or visit siteone.com/savewater. SiteOne. Growth starts here.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Water Zone. We have some really special guests on that I'm just blown away by of these people and their service that they did to our country. We're going to talk today about cybersecurity, and we have 4 people, and one is Frank Taylor. He's the president of Cambridge Global Advisors. He was president and former undersecretary for intelligence and analysis at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We also have Sherry Ramsey. She's also at CGA, and she was the director of National Security Agency, Central Security Service Threat Operations Center. That's really interesting just in the name itself, and I'm sure she's going to bring a lot of good smarts to us. Chris, why don't you do the other?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple more, Rob. We have a gentleman called Hari Hursty, Cambridge Global's senior advisor and president of election integrity. And also a shout out to Hafsa Locke, who is the vice president of business development for Cambridge Global. Rob, you want to get right into the questions?
Absolutely. One of the things that we've talked here and about our radio show is cybersecurity. And a couple of weeks ago, it was a article in a newspaper about cybersecurity is an issue at water utilities, and it's also at electrical utilities on the grid. And the feds are warning about renewed scrutiny at local plants. Now, the one that happened that was in the article was out inside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and they said they found out it was the Iranian group who were hacking them, and they were trying to change the mixture of the chemical formulation to purify the water. So if they got into that, that would have been really, I mean, if they did further damage, it would really hurt the public to that. So that's something that interests me and our guests. I know, there's certain things that we all look at every day, like how widespread is cybersecurity issues, and is there a false sense of security in the U.S. these days? Frank, I guess you'd be a good one for that.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob, for that question. And we live in a society that is cyber's everywhere. It's every aspect of our life has some cyber aspect to it. The U.S. government, for the most part, does not own the systems, the water systems, the electrical systems. They're in the private sector, and because they use cyber tools, they're vulnerable. And they have worked very hard to stay ahead of the global threats that come at them from nation states, from individuals across the world. So yes, we are very concerned about cybersecurity in our utilities and in our infrastructure. The risk is always there, and we're always searching for people who are trying to get into our systems or have successfully gotten into our systems to get them out. It's an never-ending fight to remain secure.
Just sort of tagging onto that question, if I can, Rob, real quick, because if you listen to the news or you go on your favorite social media site and just read what's going on, there's so many things happening right in cybersecurity. You've got all these warnings that China said, hey, we're out to attack U.S. critical infrastructure and so forth. Maybe for our listeners, is there sort of a ratio of how many of these threats are real versus are they fake or cry wolf sort of stuff? I've heard the term used, breach fatigue. Is that a real issue, Frank?
It's an issue, but not so much in the cybersecurity community. We understand the scope of the threat. We understand what our adversaries are trying to do, from criminals to what I used to call script kiddies, 12-year-olds in the basement of their home, to nation state actors. You have to be diligent here. And I think the U.S. has recognized that in the creation of a cybersecurity directorate at the National Security Council to further coordinate our approach to cybersecurity across government and across the private sector. So you can never be less vigilant. You have to be engaged in this 24/7 as these vulnerabilities result, and you learn about them, and then you can remedy them.
Do any of you believe that our electrical grid and water reserves are protected well enough? And then also, what are the different types of cyber attacks that they can do on these things?
Okay, yeah. So let me start out by just talking about the different kinds of cyber attacks. There's a lot of different ways we could answer this question. You could actually characterize the attacks by who the attacker is. Is it the Chinese? Is it the Iranians? Is it a Russian? Is it a 13-year-old in his basement? We could also categorize the attacks by the kind of malware that they're using. And we absolutely do that because we see malware reused over and over and over again, even across different sectors. We used to believe that malware that might be used against transportation is probably different than malware that might be used in the financial sector. We're seeing that that's absolutely not true. The same malware is being used over and over again. You could also characterize the attacks by who the attack is going against. Is it the financial sector? Is it the United States Department of Defense, et cetera? But I'm going to give us a slightly different way to think about these attacks. And it is in terms of what is the objective of the attack? What is the end result? What does the attacker want the end result of the attack to be? So I'm going to suggest there's 4 broad categories of these sorts of attacks. The first is exploitation. And in an exploitation, the attacker generally wants information. He wants data. It could be things like technical specs for missile guidance systems, our nuclear weapons. It could be new pharmaceutical products. It could be social security numbers. It really just depends. But the attacker wants to get access to our information and probably wants to access that information on an ongoing basis. So it's important for them to, when they attack our systems, to go in very quietly and to be able to live in our systems, if you will, and exfiltrate that data. The first, believe it or not, the first known one of these data exploitation attacks was back in the late 1990s. And it was against the Department of Defense, which you might have guessed, and its partners. And exploitation is still going on today, full blast across the board. A second objective is what I'm going to call disruption. And that is something like a distributed denial of service attack or a DDoS attack, where access to data, access to services, or other operations are disrupted. If that's the case, generally they do that to embarrass the person perhaps that you're disrupting the services from. These first known disruption attacks happened around 2007, actually against Estonia, and these are still going on today. Third way we can categorize these cyber attacks is destruction. And believe it or not, I'm not talking about somebody going in and blowing up a computer or doing something. I'm talking about where you actually can use software to go in and basically not allow the computer to function again. One of the ways that you can do that is we have a known attack, which was against Aramco, which is an oil company in Saudi Arabia, where the attacker went in and overwrote the firmware in the I/O chip. And without an I/O chip in a computer is nothing but a doorstop, because nothing in the computer can talk to each other. So Aramco lost 35,000 machines over a weekend because of this destructive attack. The last attack that I'm going to talk about, and this one that's on the rise, and I'm going to call it subjugation, but quite simply, most people know this as ransomware. And that is where a hacker simply goes in and makes a person, an organization, or a government, they take something of value to that organization or person, and they make it unavailable to them until they pay a ransom. So it's really taken data as a hostage, and it's normally done by just encrypting the data with a key that's known only to the hacker. Once the ransom is paid, generally the data is released and becomes available again, because after all, if people realize I'm going to pay and not get my data back, then they'll stop paying. So in summary, a simple way to characterize attacks is by their purpose or objective. And we've talked about 4, all of them are still ongoing today. I'm sorry, I was going to answer the other part of the question, and Frank, you jump in please as well. Is our electrical grid and water preserves protected enough? And I would say no, absolutely, they're not today. And that's something that we need to partner with private industry, since most of those facilities are owned in the private sector. The government needs to partner with them to figure out how to do that. Frank, do you have something to add to that question?
I agree with you 100%. It's the diligence that's necessary to stay ahead of the who are trying. I think Harry had a comment as well.
Yes, I would characterize it from the different point of view when we look at critical infrastructure. We have 2 different elements. We have IT and OT. The information technology is really your backends, your PCs, and that is the area where normal ransomware, normal malware, normal crimeware tools, which you can deploy against any industry, will work. And the result is loss of money, embarrassment, all of these nice things. But when we look critically, the last part of that is SCADA systems. They are embedded systems. They have a lifespan of decades. They are often have a very limited capability of the software upgrade. So the vulnerabilities which are deployed today will be living on foreseeable future. Also, the things which were deployed in 2000, back in the day when cyber warfare was more science fiction than it's today, those systems are still vulnerable. And when OT systems, the operational technology systems, are compromised, it's not only embarrassment and loss of money, it's also loss of life and property, and very often a permanent loss of property. So when we look into how we improve, whether it's a power grid, sewer system, water system, any part of operational technology systems in critical infrastructure, we have to understand those systems have a lifespan way longer than your PC, and we have to be ultra responsible what we deploy there. However, unfortunately, not only in the US but everywhere else, there is a cost-driving trend to use a commercial-grade technology just to offset the cost. So we are irresponsibly also deploying in that area technology which doesn't fit. That is everywhere where you have an Internet of Things and embedded systems where cost is such a humongous part of the driver. So we have to be ethical and more responsible in how we design these systems, how we understand the lifespan, and how we live with what we have deployed.
As a sort of a review of what you just said, I mean, a lot of definition there, a lot of description, and I thank you for that. And our listeners are going to get a great deal from listening to that. But maybe now that we know a little bit more about what defines cyber threats, cyber security, let's take a look at what does effective cybersecurity look like, right? How do you qualify it? How do you quantify it? Maybe Sherry and Hari, a question for you also, and Frank, jump in anytime.
Yeah, so effective cybersecurity is somewhat of an elusive concept these days. There's really no one silver bullet that we could implement and say we have an effective strategy, because if someone truly had an effective strategy, actually it would be Hari, and he would have done it already. We would not be sitting here having this conversation today and talking about it, and we wouldn't continue to be hearing about and reading about cyber attacks. But I want to think at a very high level. There's kind of three overall pieces to a cybersecurity strategy. The first would be to make our networks defensible, and that's to make them as secure as possible, using, for example, the critical controls from the Center for Internet Security. And then the trend today is moving more towards zero trust as a way to make your networks defensible, if you will. And Hari's going to talk a lot more about that in just a second. Then the second part of the high-level concept is to actually be able to defend your networks. So that is to have visibility into the networks, to understand what the norms are, to know where data moves, at a particular time of day, what nodes are sharing data, for example. And organizations often either own their own security operations center, or they buy that as a service to have someone monitor their networks, and that's really important. And the last suggestion is, despite all of that, and we're talking about effective cybersecurity, there's a good chance something bad's going to happen. And so if that's the case, then organizations absolutely need to have an incident response plan and a contingency plan, and they need to practice those plans. They need to have them in place. They need to practice it, because you don't want to wait until something bad happens to everybody run around and start looking for the book on what to do. So we absolutely need to practice that over and over again, so that everyone knows their role, everyone knows their part, everyone knows how to get services back online, everyone knows how to get data back accessible, and so forth. And then the very last part of this is we have to have effective communication. And that's sharing threat information, it's sharing best practices, it's sharing information about vulnerabilities and malware, and that's sharing, among government organizations, among private sector organizations, between the government and the private sector. It's really sharing on a global scale. And then we're going to talk, I think, a little bit more about this later, but also the sharing needs to happen with colleges and universities and people who do training, so that they can adequately begin to train the next generation of cybersecurity professionals, and in fact, continue to train the current generation of cybersecurity professionals. So with that, Hari, I'm going to turn it over to you, because I think zero trust has become such a key concept to effective cybersecurity these days. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. Since the mainframes became the definition of computer, we have been believing in usernames and passwords. After that, we started having networks, we started believing in firewalls. And all of these are form of castle and moat perimeter defense. Once you get accepted to inside of the perimeter, you have an easier way to navigate to resources, which means also lateral movement for the attacker. We have been coming to end of this road. We cannot anymore depend our systems based on firewalls, based on perimeter defense, based on the idea of passwords. So zero trust is a ideology. It's a fundamental paradigm shift in the security philosophy, where we start looking into instead of having trust but verify, it's never trust and always verify. It means that every single action you take will be contextualized and then revalidated based on the environment you're operating. So, for example, you have access to this file during working hours, and it's completely normal. You access 10 of these files before lunch. But if you all of a sudden want to access 500 files, 5 in the morning, that might be a reason to believe that the behavior has changed. And even when you have the right credentials, now that action should be scrutinized again and it should be validated again. So this means that every action is not about you have action to this. It's about do you have a legit reason in the context you're operating to access this. And it's called defending your crown jewels. The crown jewels are not necessarily files. They can be APIs, access to a system. They can be workflows. They can also be files. And in today's world, in today's environment, we don't even know in the corporate world where your crown jewels are. They can be in the virtual machines. They can be in cloud, where cloud provider can move them all around the planet. They can be living inside of containers. So if the container is not running, you don't even see where it is. So that's why we are changing the thinking from defending your edge, defending your environment, to analyzing in the context, what are my crown jewels, how I defend those, how I grant access, the minimum access possible to anyone who needs to access it, and deprivate the access away the moment it's gone, the need is gone. So it is fundamentally changed how we think about defending the environment around us. And it requires a lot of things like tokenization of security, a lot of technology. Important part is it's not a product. You cannot go to shop and say, I want to buy zero trust for my company or my agency. It's a journey. And everybody's journey is different. You have to analyze what are your operating environment, what are your threats, what are your assets, and then design your own journey where you prioritize what is important to you. And as a part of the journey, it is different tools, different trainings, different everything. And the last but most important is the philosophy. If you take the zero trust tools and you don't change your way of thinking, you're probably weakening your security. So you have to make that shift and the fundamental say the philosophy and thinking how you think your cybersecurity in your organization in order to be effective in the journey to the zero trust.
Wow, there is just such intense complexity in this whole thing, Hari and Sherry. And I don't know if you mentioned this in your previous part of the previous answer there, but in part of the show notes there, we're kind of looking at a term that I hadn't seen before, and it's called the CIA triad in cybersecurity. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. The three letters CIA means different things to different folks, but in this particular context, it refers to confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And this is a common model that's designed to guide policies for the protection of information systems. So confidentiality is an organization's effort to ensure that data is kept secret and private, that is protected from unauthorized access and disclosure. So managing data confidentiality is all about protecting data against intentional or unintentional, unlawful or unauthorized access, disclosure, or theft. And so to accomplish this, access to information must be controlled so that the unauthorized sharing of that information is prevented. So one way to do this is to follow the practice of least privilege access, and that is where employees or personnel can only access the data that they absolutely need to do their jobs, no more, no less. Many companies are implementing also an identity access management program, which includes identity and privilege access management, multi-factor authentication, and regular reviews where they actually go in and look to see who's accessing the data. That also secure passwords are necessary, that they need to be developed and enforced and changed, no longer using 1234 or 1111 or your last name or something like that. And then of course, the final step, which some organizations might go to this extreme, would be to encrypt the data and then use only encrypted communications for that that allow that data to be accessed. Data integrity is ensuring that your stored data is accurate. It's the original data that you put out there. No one's changed it, that it's complete, it's consistent, it's valid, and it must be attributable. So you need to know who owns that data, who put it out there, who's responsible for it. So in other words, you want to make sure that that data is trustworthy and is free from tampering. Today, business decisions particularly, but also many decisions in terms of the effectiveness of how a water plant operates, for example, that's all based on data. And so it's really important that our data be trustworthy and that we believe that it hasn't been tampered with. So with that increased important dependence on data for business viability, it's really critical that that the data you use to make those decisions has integrity. There are a number of best practices to achieve data integrity. They include validating your input data, implementing access controls, keeping an audit trail, always backing up your data, having a second copy of that. And then of course, adopting and using cybersecurity best practices. And then, and a really important part is then educating your workforce so that they understand all of this and understand the importance of that. Availability is ensuring that all of our business-related data and services are available when we need it to be. So that's so that when an individual user needs access to a specific part of the information or a specific service, they're able to access that information and consume it for whatever purpose they need is relevant to why they need that information. The most basic step to ensure availability for organizations is to use redundant networks, redundant servers, redundant applications. And of course, as Hari mentioned earlier when we were talking about zero trust, that's expensive to have everything to be backed up and to be redundant. So, and sometimes that's just not fiscally responsible. And so that's why cybersecurity is so difficult. It is, always measuring the effect of what you think you're doing with the cost of what it takes to do that. So, but if you do have multiple sources of the data available and you have a failure, whether it be someone hacked in, you think the data's been tampered with, perhaps just your server went down, perhaps a hurricane came, and the power's off, then you have multiple copies of that data and that should lead to the data being available. So in summary, these are kind of three critical components to protecting your data. And confidentiality is knowing that your data is protected from unauthorized access. Integrity is being able to trust your data. And availability is knowing that you can access your data when you need to.
If I use as an example ransomware, we often only think that ransomware is about denying your availability of the data. But that's not true. Because if you have an extortion case, now leaking the data and confidentiality is not an element. But we humans, with our monkey brain and lizard brain, we are stupid. We always think about what is stolen from us. We are never thinking about what is added. So if you pay a ransom and your data gets decrypted, you actually have lost the confidence of the data integrity because you don't know if in that process something gets added or modified. So that whole idea of integrity loss in the case you pay ransomware is very often missed, especially now when the recent studies show that 70% of the modern malware or crimeware utilizes AI. So such a nimble data modifications which were previously believed to be impossible without detection are now possible. So we have to really always understand that it's very seldom when, if you have a breach, you only lose one. You almost always lose all three, regardless you understand it or not.
Interesting. Frank, what I hear the words, and I don't understand the difference between what they call threat, vulnerability, and risk. Maybe you can straighten me out.
Well, I'll try to straighten you out. It's pretty simple. A vulnerability is a flaw or a weakness in your system's design that allows a threat actor, the threat, to penetrate your systems and exploit those systems for bad purposes. And a risk is the potential for your systems to be penetrated by that threat, and you can mitigate that risk by taking cybersecurity steps to limit the risk to your system. So the threat is the potential for someone to get into your system. The vulnerability is the thing that the threat exploits to get into your system, and risk is those steps that you take to reduce that vulnerability to make the likelihood of a penetration less successful.
Harry, I hear the term zero vulnerability hacker, and I guess that's different because it lists you as an ethical hacker, and it's obviously you are a world security expert. Can you explain again, because our audience is all new to this, and so are we, on what's the difference between those things?
So you probably refer to a 0 day and 0 click. Is that true? Okay.
Yes.
So basically, when you are talking about a 0 day, it means a previously unknown, undisclosed vulnerability, which no mitigation is available at the time it's utilized first time out in the wild. Because of certain irresponsible behavior on vulnerability disclosure, it might actually be already known vulnerability, but it has been never disclosed to the defender or the people who need to mitigate. So, grain of salt if it's actually completely new or it's just not known for the defenders. But generally speaking, it's something that happens out in the wild, you didn't know it's coming, and you had no mitigation strategy in place. Zero click is a more term to the mobile phone world, which means any kind of crimeware or attack which comes to your device with no action, without no action on the user's part. So, for example, there is a buffer overflow, there's a vulnerability in the text messaging system. You send a certain kind of malformed text message, and that enables arbitrary code to be running, takes over your phone, meaning user can do everything right, and you are still dead in the water when the message comes in. And a lot of the zero-click attacks are actually coming from also 0 days, because these are kind of vulnerabilities which get patched very quickly. There's one more term which is living in the same realm, and that is living off the land. So previously, in the previous generation, when the operating systems were very small and they have very limited functionality, the malware had to carry over all the functionalities it needed. So there needed to be a lot of functionality in the malware itself, which meant that the malware files were larger, and then they can be fingerprinted and detected. Living off the land means that nowadays, when the operating systems are feature rich, there are a lot of feature functionalities embedded and built in. The malware can work with the operating system, using features which are already part of the system. This allows a fileless attack, so there's actually nothing you can fingerprint. There's no file to be stored. It lives in the computer's own operation system, whether it's a script, whether it's in registry, etc. And especially now when mobile phones have become running almost a desktop quality environments, we are starting to see the rise of the same living off the land attacks which have been starting in the servers and desktop to be feasible on a mobile phone world.
Well, we're halfway through the interview, and we're going to continue that on the next show on April 4th. But pretty interesting topic. What to say, Chris?
I'd say it was great. Recording that interview and doing that, Rob, with those guys. We learned so much. We scheduled a good amount of time to do it because we knew there was a lot of content in there that our listeners would be interested in, and just re-listening to it after we did it. Of course, I listened to it when we did the editing, Rob. But I mean, just a fascinating subject.
And we personally thank all of them, especially Harry, who was calling on the other side of the world in Europe to make the conversation with us. There's more we're going to talk about next week about the dark web and some other things that can really affect all operations of water districts and water wholesalers, also electrical grids, and also the petroleum industry. And these people are tops in their thing. As I said, Frank was the Undersecretary of Defense. Sherry was head of a laboratory for the intelligence group, and it's just amazing of these people's background that they have. And we also have a lady who is chief of the FBI Cyber Lab also. So next week's going to be really good. Let me give you a real quick thing about some PSAs that are coming up. This is for the irrigation industry and lighting people. So anybody in Irrigation and Lighting magazine, it's the go-to resource for landscape irrigation and lighting contractors, and they're looking for business leaders who have had a successful year and are promoting growth within their organization. And you can get recognized for your hard work by submitting your success story to Watch Us Grow at the 2024 Industry Standouts Contest. What you do is apply by April 1st. Go to irrigationandlighting.org, and any business that's in the lighting and irrigation business and can give some information on how they grew their business and all the success they had. They'll feature you in articles and give you lots of promotion, so we ask you to do that. Anyway, Chris, any other parting words here?
No, I was just going to say, this is a chance for anybody in the green industry, right? Anybody in irrigation, landscaping, or lighting to get their story told in the IA magazine. Irrigation and Lighting magazine is published by the Irrigation Association. So again, guys, go to irrigationandlighting.org and apply and tell them your story. Great opportunity for exposure.
Absolutely. Again, we want to thank our distinguished guests who participated in this, and they'll be back with us next week to complete the second half of the interview. And we hope everybody's enjoying their weekend and have a great weekend. And we will talk to you next week. And remember, the most important thing Chris and I always tell you to do is please help
keep our planet blue.
Because if you like green, you got to have blue. Good night, everybody. We'll talk to you next week.